Yep. I sense the energy of real, true left radicals in the house. If you are here to transform society and police, do what we need to do in this world, make some noise, make some noise. Let me know you're here. I thought so. That's what I'm talking about. What up, everybody? I am the poet known as Analysis, and on behalf of the entire Red Emma's Bookstore Coffee House team, collective, family, we welcome you home, because now you know where your new home is, here at 3128 Green Mount Avenue. Brand new look. What do you think? What do you think? Good. How many of you are visiting Red Emma's of any location for the very first time? All right, a few folk, excellent. Welcome. How many of you are visiting the Green Mount Avenue space for the first time? Good. So now you get a chance to see it. Everybody has given it rave reviews, and we hope you do the same. We want you to come back and take advantage of it. Red Emma's, in case you did not know, began in 2004 as a small worker collective dedicated to equitable and sustainable practices, doing something different in the middle of a big capitalist economy. And it has grown over the years, has moved throughout locations. We just opened the doors here about a month ago. We are very excited because not only did we come into these buildings, but unlike before, we actually purchased these two buildings. So we own this building, that's right, and that one that runs along 32nd, all right? So eventually when that gets renovated, that will be the bookstore, and you'll be able to go in from this side or the 32nd Street side. You say, where are all the books right now? They are downstairs, all right? So you need to come back when you have time to browse books. The bookstore is closed because we keep it open during the holiday from 10 in the morning to 7 p.m. Right now, some of you are thinking, Analysis, we came all this way, we want to see the books. Some of us came an hour or two away, and we didn't drive all this way not to be able to get into the bookstore. Well, if you say the magic words later on in the evening, the bookstore doors might magically open and you can come down and get books. Only if you say the magic words, only if there's enough radical energy to do that. I'm not going to tell you what the magic words are now. You're going to have to stick around and find out. All right? But if there are enough people that say them later, we might open the bookstore. But definitely, as I mentioned earlier, please feel free to order something during the event. There are plenty of events. We want you to keep track of them in the coming weeks. A lot of good things coming up. I'm just going to mention a few of them by highlight. Laura Mason will be here this Thursday, the 1st at 7 p.m. to discuss The Last Revolutionaries, the conspiracy trial of Gracchus Babeau and the Equals. Let me confess, I know absolutely nothing about Gracchus Babeau and the Equals. But see, this is the type of thing you can come and find out and learn about at Red Emma's. The story of a poor man and radical activist who fought to revive the French Revolution and whose failure heralded the Republic's defeat. That's Laura Mason this coming Thursday at 7 p.m., a week from tonight. Longtime Red Emma's fan. This is an awesome professor of anthropology at Towson University. Her name, many of you know her. Her name is Nicole Fabricant. She will be here presenting Fighting to Breathe, Race, Toxicity, and the Rise of Youth Activism in Baltimore. I love it. As a longtime youth worker and educator, when you talk about youth activism, you sound in the bell as far as I'm concerned. Nikki Fab, as I call her, that's one of her social media names. She'll be here in conversation with another longtime Red Emma's fan member, Dr. Lawrence Brown, and one of the youth activists themselves, Shoshana Campbell. That will be a week from tonight, December 3rd at 7 p.m., Fighting to Breathe. Please be sure to go to redemmas.org and go to the events tab so you can see everything that's coming up. Too many good things to name. We have folk like Margaret Cerullo coming in. We'll have a commemoration of the Reverend Father Philip Berrigan. That's going to be a real good. Max Alvarez and Jamie McCallum are coming. My friend Janice Sarbanes has got a new one out. She'll be here. Just all kinds of things. Certainly, I know you are already marking your calendars for February 4th, the first Saturday in February, because you never want to miss Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe, the quarterly venue of peace, justice, poetry that we host here. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary a couple of weeks ago, so I know I'll see you February the 4th right here for more peace, justice, and poetry. True?
Yes.
Ready?
Yes.
Good. Hashtag Red Emma's. At sign is at Red Emma's. Tell somebody that they should have listened to you when you told them to come on down with you tonight and they started hemming and hawing and fighting you and didn't come. Hashtag Red Emma's, hashtag Red Emma's event, especially for this crucial discussion that we have this evening. All right, I heard you. All right, I said all right. I heard you. What the fuck are you doing? My hands are down. All right, I heard you. My hands are down. My hands are... That's what I heard he said before the metal darts bore into him, before all that current tore in through him. 50,000 volts, not once but twice, causing a schism in his neural and cardiac system. Let's do the division. 100,000 by 20 years of a young black man's life. That would be 5,000 units of hate for each year he had to live with the stress and strife of being a young African in a society full of banality and police brutality. A society of racial profiling, subtly smiling, thinking in its collective head, oh well, just another nigga dead. Cops copped a life of color. A cat got cat by even cops of color who copped out and got co-opted into corrupt conformity that consigns our kind to some crazy contumely, creating a contempt that ran some amps to stamp out our community and watch the SWAT our attempt to live humanly. Yeah, I know that damn goose made him kind of loose. But that was no justification for an electronic noose. They made it seem like he was in a threatening position, but that's another damn law enforcement fiction, because eyewitnesses made statements to the contrary. But what I witness too often from the local constabulary is a lack of emotional fitness to be carrying weaponry and a dangerous disposition to be the adversary. And so he was tasered. You know that electronic control device has gotten out of control and is now the device of choice of many an out-of-control control freak. That non-lethal weapon, which has been surprisingly lethal for the more than 300 people whose lives it's leaked. I already had a negative view about it. I never thought this close to home the news would hit. Checked my phone. 5 times my sister had called. Oh shit, something's wrong, y'all. Found out later. 2, shocked to ball. 2, stunned to cry. The guy who loved to run ball, whose smile was still so childlike on a man-child's body tall, was shocked and stunned to death, shrouded under hatred's pall. The first baby boy of my sister. How I wish I could be with her, how more than ever I missed her. I can only imagine her screams as her young mister, which the Creator gifted her, was ripped from her, creating a rift in her. God, please uplift in her the strength to go on. Took him to a game once. Woo-hoo. Thank God for that one time, which he enjoyed and appreciated. Let me know I wasn't hated, even though my calls and cars were belated, and though I rarely was around, he'd never be rated. Now, this is no excuse for it. It's nothing that makes it right, but admittedly, for a time, his sister and I went running tight. No, not like there was a fight. Nothing deranged, just a brother and a sister estranged, though that was beginning to change. But for the longest time, it was for no other reason than that we hadn't sat down to talk. Now we were in a season of tragedy, which brought us into a closer walk. Now, I respected my sis because she always invited, always pleaded with me to come get him and be that uncle I was supposed to be. Spend time with him. Be a man with him. Encourage and, if need be, reprimand him. Help him focus. Teach him. Give him some locus where he could reach in and center himself and execute his plans. Now he's been executed by trigger-happy hands. Weird, isn't it? Spend a career working with other people's kids while your relationship with some of your own hits the skids, made slippery with good intentions. So with all that having been mentioned, can't make the same mistakes of absence with the next two. Gotta honor Rail's memory and to them be true. Oh, internal investigations, of course, found no wrongdoing and thus no punitive action was ensuing. Obviously, they weren't really looking. Too much a part of the system to make the correct booking. The not-so-grand jury made no convictions. The oppressors hope that we lack conviction and will wither in this war of attrition. They act as if we owe them contrition. But no. There will be no acquiescence to the slaver's electronic whip. No letting the memory of Jarrell and others slip. No voltage that will leave our minds so dazed, our souls so... Tased that we accept this shit in It's just an unfortunate phase and do nothing but turn the page or turn aside from our justified rage. No, we won't let ourselves be consumed by hate. But we don't appreciate the continued rate at which our killers get to skate. Too many folk have been charged and their murderers not charged. Too many folk have been charged while in the authorities charged and left twisted in some dying position while those in charge get to hide behind their badges and positions. Some charging us with the mission of unplugging the injustice which kills our brothers and sisters, which kills our children. Shocking, but true. So let's do what we got to do. Speak love to our young ones while we have the opportunity. Speak truth to power to end police impunity. We cannot and will not accept this current reoccurrence of hate. The survival of our families is at issue. Indeed, the survival of our community. And Yorel, I miss you. Keep that energy, keep that same energy, keep that same energy, because our dynamic speakers in the house tonight, and we are so glad that they are back visiting us. She is a black lesbian immigrant survivor. Let me say that again, a black lesbian immigrant survivor. Y'all didn't hear me because y'all ain't making no noise. She is a black lesbian immigrant, what? Survivor, who has been documenting, organizing, advocating, litigating, and agitating around policing and criminalization of black women, girls, trans, and gender non-conforming people for the past count them, 3 decades. She is the author, yes, long time in the struggle, the author of Invisible No More, which he came to us a few years ago and dropped some knowledge on police violence against black women and women of color. She is the co-author of Say Her Name, Resisting Police Brutality Against Black Women and Queer Injustice, the Criminalization of LGBT People in the United States. She co-founded the Interrupting Criminalization Initiative with Mariam Kaba, as well as the In Our Names network of over 20 organizations working to end police violence against black women, girls, trans, and gender non-conforming people. She and her writing partner, Mariam, have the brand new joint. We've been looking for this for a long time. It is so necessary. There are at least 8 times this many people in this city that ought to be trying to get into this room, because Baltimore needs this book and needs this discussion. Make some noise tonight for presenting No More Police, the Case for Abolition, written with Mariam Kaba. I need you to make some real roof-raising, radical Red Emma's noise for Andrea, Jay, Ritchie.
I mean, I don't really need to say anything else, right? We're good. We heard it. We heard the case for abolition. We just heard it from Analysis, and I'm just so grateful to be in the room, learning from and blessed by his words and vision again. And I'm incredibly blessed to be here at Red Emma's. I want to thank Analysis and John and all the worker owners for inviting me to be here tonight. I have a particularly special place in my heart for Red Emma's because I lived in Toronto for 8 years in Red Emma's old rooms, next door to the Wing On Funeral Home. And I found that out by reading a book one day about the street I lived on, and it explained a lot about why my cat was running around talking at 3 a.m. and one might say dancing. So I feel like I've been communicating with Red Emma for a long time, and I'm really grateful to be here with y'all tonight. I wanted to start with telling you who I am. I'm Andrea. I go by she. I'm fine with any pronoun. For those watching on live stream and folks who can't see me, I am a very light-skinned black woman with curly hair, blue glasses, I think, tonight. I'm masked. If you can't hear me, I'll just speak up. I'm wearing a blue sweater, and I have curly hair, and I'm sitting in this armchair looking out at some beautiful faces in this room. I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. It is borrowed from the Baltimore Writing Center project. It's very small on the screen, but it acknowledges the indigenous peoples past, present, and future, who are the rightful and traditional protectors and caretakers of their native lands in what is known today as the United States. And particularly, we recognize that we're participating in the historical, ongoing, and violent legacy of land theft initiated by white colonialist settlers who first invaded the Chesapeake region in the 17th century, and specifically were on the ancestral lands of the Iroquois-speaking Susquehannock peoples, Algonquian-speaking peoples of the Cedarville Band of the Piscataway Conoy and the Piscataway Indian Nation, and the Piscataway Conoy tribe, all of whom shared the area through their relationships and whose descendants are thriving and resisting settler occupation. And we also are acknowledging our complicity in the historical, deliberate, and ongoing attempts by settlers and their systems of oppression to appropriate indigenous cultures, ignore or break treaties with sovereign native nations, and perpetrate and obfuscate racist and violent acts of political, social, economic, and ecological white supremacy. And we acknowledge the fundamental role that these colonialist acts have and continue to play in the historical and contemporary disenfranchisement, surveillance, and harm of Black people in the United States. So recognizing these intertwining injustices, this land acknowledgement serves as an opening to contemplate the continuing resistance to colonial indoctrination through various indigenous and Black movements for identity, freedom, and self-determination. We commit to ending anti-Black racism, modern colonialism, and white supremacy, and to creating equitable relations that honor and heal communities and the land. We further advocate for ecological, relational, social, and political restoration and healing through the return of Native and Indigenous lands to their sovereign, rightful stewards. So there's some organizations listed there that you're invited to support. And again, I want to thank the Baltimore Writing Center Project for offering us this particular land acknowledgement this weekend, specifically, and also inviting us to not just acknowledge whose land we're on, but our ongoing complicity in settler colonialism and our responsibility to join in resistance. So I'm grateful to y'all for bearing with me as I read through that. Also really grateful to y'all for masking up. Y'all are practicing Black feminist abolitionist futures tonight with me, and for that I am deeply grateful. When the pandemic first began, Interrupting Criminalization, the organization I co-founded with Mariam Kaba, created these postcards based on the work of many artists around the country to invite conversation. You can download them at that link and use them to be in conversation with your family about why you're still masking up, because 400 people are still dying every single day of COVID, and I'm not willing to discount them because they are elder or disabled kin. That we are masking up because 1 in 4 cases of COVID results in long COVID, and that chance increases every time you get COVID. And we're masking up because we want to support our friends and families in staying safe. And that is part of the Black feminist politic of collective care that No More Police is written through. So thank you all for joining in that. If you don't have a mask and you need a mask, Analysis and John will be happy to get you a mask. So thank you for doing that. And with that, I'm going to start with a sort of quick tour through No More Police. I really want to be in conversation with those of you who have read it, those of you who haven't read it, and some of you who are in it, who are here. So I want to hear what you all have to say about the book, and so I want to get to that really quickly. But there's a couple ways that we invite folks into the conversation, into the book, and the first question we ask at the very start of the book is, when was the first time you questioned the violence of policing? So I'm asking you all that now. Anyone want to yell out when you first questioned the violence of policing? Like maybe when you heard an Analysis poem, might have been the one time. 2010 on Tumblr. On Tumblr? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? When did you first question the violence of policing? When I was a child. Right? Yeah, when we were young. Anyone else?
Crossing the border from Mexico into Texas as a trans person.
That would definitely make you question the violence of policing. Thank you for sharing. I mean, the answer is different for each of us, for each generation, and many of us have multiple answers, right? So for me, it was Rodney King. Eleanor Bumpers, Amadou Diallo, Taisha Miller, LaTanya Haggerty, Sean Bell, who was killed by police on his wedding day. The death anniversary was just a few days ago. For many in this room, it might be Mike Brown, or it might be Freddie Gray and Maya Hall, who were killed here in 2015 by police and national security. For an unprecedented number of people in 2020, it was the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. For me, it was also when I was young. For many of us, it was when we or a member of our family or community experienced violence of police or criminalization, or when we needed help and none came, or when, worse yet, they came and they came for us. For me, it also was when I was a young 20-year-old, when there was a very visible war of ongoing settler colonial occupation a mile from where I grew up. A land dispute about land that I had grown up on that was first navigated by the police and then by the Canadian Army, that lay siege to a community in Ganasatake, again a mile from where I lived, for months, and that ended in tremendous police violence. And I got to see straight up front, up close, up personal, the violence of settler colonialism today, not just in the distant past, and the role that the police and military played in it, hand in hand. For me, it was the violence of police enforcing settler colonial apartheid in South Africa, the violence of policing at the border, the violence of policing on my campus and repression of protests, the violence of policing in the streets in communities I cared about every single day. And for me, in all of these situations, it became clear that police were never a source of safety, that they were a source of violence, and that is part of what led me to this work and what led many of us to this work. Another question we asked folks as a point of entry is, how would you describe police or policing in one sentence? Anyone got one sentence about how you would, someone said, what's police or what's policing? What's your one sentence response? Your elevator response? Police? Pardon? Ineffective. Police is ineffective. Yes, Rob? Police are the violent enforcers of the system of capitalism. Other people say, Alex Goodwin says, police are the muscle of racial capitalism. Any other thoughts? Police are, policing is? If you come up with a really good one, share it on social media. We asked a few of our friends and some folks who were quoted in the book, and then assembled their responses on posters. I guess mine was police are violence, not safety. And police are the realization of state violence in human form. Police defend the system of capitalism that generates crime. Police is the discretionary violence of order making. Police is the armed protection of state interests. Policing is state-sanctioned attempt to steal the future from the oppressed. Policing is the protracted death of captive life. Policing is safety's negation. Police exist to enforce existing relations of power and property, period. Just from No More Police, period. We assembled another one about policing, the practice of policing. Policing is a deadly failure of the imagination, says my comrade from Decrim Seattle. Policing is a mode of world-making. Policing is the violent enforcement of the empowered status quo, etc. Policing is not law's absence, it is law's essence in a system of racial capitalism. And procedural reform expands police power. So if you want these posters to, again, generate conversation with your friends and family over the holidays, you can get them and give them as stocking stuffers and have a conversation around your table. Because that was our goal in No More Police. We made a case for abolition, but we want folks to engage with it. We want folks to participate in it. We want folks to dispute it, disagree with it, build on it, and most of all, make that case in their home, in their communities, in their families, and with their loved ones. So that's one way of doing it. The case we make is very simple. Police don't promote safety, they prevent it. The violence of policing cannot be reformed. Police are violence, and we can create safety without policing. And when we're making that case, we recognize that police are the frontline manufacturers and enforcers of larger systems and structures of oppression and repression that we loathe. And therefore, it's not just about getting rid of police and policing, but it's about getting rid of the structures and systems and relations of power that they uphold and enforce, maintain, and manufacture. And that therefore, police abolition opens the door to dismantling the world they create and to building the world they rob us of. And so I'm sort of giving you kind of highlight quotes from the book. When fully realized, police abolition dismantles the exploitative systems and practices of power that have shaped the global capitalist system, changes the way we understand the world and relate to each other, and builds new structures to meet our individual and collective needs, and to prevent, interrupt, and heal from violence and harm. So often folks say, you say no more police. They say, what about the violence? Cops don't stop violence. I spent a lot of time researching this. A lot of people have spent a lot of time researching this, and a lot of people don't need to spend time researching this because that is their lived experience. And so there's a lot of stats and things quoted in the back, and you can go find them if you need them. But ultimately, police failure to stop and interrupt or transform violence, I guess is a word missing there, is no accident. Policing has never been about preventing violence. What's policing been about? What's the roots of policing? Slave patrols, Indian police, and militarized border enforcement. Policing of immigrant and working class workers, and policing of gender and sexuality. That's what they're about. That's what they were formed to do. That's what they continue to do, whether it's here in the US or abroad. It's always been about fabricating and maintaining a particular order using violence, directly and indirectly, to control and contain racialized and gendered populations and people in service of a capitalist economic order. You can't have capitalism without police. You can't have police without capitalism. They go hand in hand. That's what it's about. And so to us, a system does what you see a system doing is what it was set up to do. It's not like it's an accident. It's a feature, not a bug. So there's plenty of research in the chapter. I think what I want to really call people's attention to is that the chapter also cites extensively from research, including a lot of research by cops themselves. Cops themselves know that cops don't stop violence. And they document that in, like, I taught a class called Policing at University of Illinois, Chicago. And I looked at the textbook and I was like, oh, they know. There's actually pages and pages of studies showing that response time change doesn't change violence, number of cops doesn't change violence, how they do the policing, hotspot, direct, patrol, none of it changed. They know that. They also know they don't solve they only solve a quarter of the crimes, and that doesn't actually lead necessarily to any end to violence. They know that. They're not trying to tell you that, but they know that. They've done the studies, and so they're cited there. But I think the chapter closes by really opening up the framing of the questions, because regardless of whether or not you can find me a study that shows, well, actually, under these circumstances, this happened, we're being presented with a false dichotomy, cops or nothing. And what we cite in the book is research that shows that other things are far more effective at preventing violence. That if you increase the number of community-based organizations, you will decrease the number of homicides. You will decrease the amount of violence. If you give people housing and guaranteed income, you will decrease the amount of violence. You will decrease the amount of homicides. So there are other ways of doing it, but those don't serve the same social orders. So we're offered one thing or nothing, and then told, what do you want? And so that's really actually, to me, the most important message from that chapter. The next one is called We Are Survivors. As you heard from my introduction from analysis, I'm a survivor of interpersonal and state and police violence and community violence, all of them. I am somebody who is saying, I want more and better for myself and for the people I know in my community who have experienced all those forms of harm than what they're getting right now. And the vast majority of people leaving movements to defund and abolish police are actually survivors of violence, of domestic violence, of sexual violence, of homophobic violence, of transphobic violence, of anti-immigrant violence, of global war violence, and of police violence, which is a form of violence. So I think this is sort of this gotcha that people are like, well, what about the rapists? Well, guess what? 75% of people who experience rape don't call the cops. What about the batterers? Almost half of people who experience domestic violence never call the cops. What about violence against trans women? 3/4 of trans women say no matter what kind of violence I'm experiencing in my community, I'm never calling the cops because I know that they are violence. So we want something else. We want more, we want better. We want the things that we know will increase our access to prevent, intervene in, interrupt, avoid, and leave unsafe situations. Housing is always number one. If you have a place to go and a door to close, the violence against you, if you're alone in that space, the violence against you reduces. If you have income, if you have health care, if the people around you have health care, including mental health care, if the pressure on a community, economic, political, or otherwise increases, it gets distributed along the crack lines of power. If we take the pressure off a community, then that violence isn't going to get distributed in the same way. So there's an event that we're hosting on the 30th. I'll put up the information later, but led about survivors about this particular chapter because I think this is the hardest one for people to grasp. So Mariam, my beloved co-author, to whom you should attribute many brilliant things that are in this book, asked us to name this chapter Reform. Because basically reform is about reforming something that has the same core essence into a new form. So Baltimore has extensive experience with this. Y'all have been under a consent decree for, I don't know, 15 million years, and I'm gonna guess that it hasn't reduced the violence in your community. I know that from the people I talk to. So reform does not reduce the violence of policing, but I bet you've spent a lot of money. How much have y'all spent on this consent decree? $110 million, roughly, and no increased safety. What could we have gotten instead with $110 million? But what it does is it legitimates police as a solution to the social problems that police themselves produced. So reforms give you the idea that we're doing something about it, so it shields ongoing police violence. It also gives them more money, so it fuels more police violence. And it gives the illusion of change and funneling more resources and power to them under the pretext of addressing the problem. So there's, again, a 100-year history. Ever since police have been formed, someone's been trying to reform them because they are violent. And that has over and over again resulted in more money to cops, no reduction in violence, and no investment in those other things that I was talking about that would actually make a difference. Now that doesn't mean that we're not trying to make change, right? It's not gonna be no more police tomorrow. I know you came here hoping for that, but it's not tomorrow. But to get there, it also doesn't mean that like any campaign that we lead, if it's not get rid of all police immediately tomorrow, then that's bourgeois sellout. No. Let's be discerning. There are some changes that will reduce the power, the resources, the legitimacy, and the hold that cops have on our imaginations. And there are some that will perpetuate police and their legitimacy and their resources and the hold they have on our imaginations. So we list a couple of sort of points around how we know which are transformative demands and which are ones that are just going to reform. But then that's just a couple things. Then we made like a whole description of a discernment process that folks went through in Chicago in 2015 when y'all were doing that here. Folks in Chicago were trying to figure out body cams? Nah. More money, more power, no decreased violence. Do we want more training? Doesn't seem to work. Do we want this? So they went through a process and came up with a series of demands. There's a list in there of how they did that. Then we also made you an organizer binder called Is This an Abolitionist Proposal or Not? So if you go on our website, you'll find that. We make charts because I'm a Capricorn and I love charts. And so it's very important to have things in charts for you to understand. So there's a whole bunch of ways you can discern these questions that we offer in the book and elsewhere. Okay, so often the first question people have is, well, what are we going to do instead? Let's not make police wearing different uniforms and doing different things. So a lot of times people say, sure, treatment, not trauma. Sometimes treatment is the trauma. My grandmother was incarcerated in a mental institution for a significant period of her life. That is not treatment. That is trauma. And so many other people talk about when we have someone else respond to people with unmet mental health needs if their only option of response is, I'm going to give you some medication you don't necessarily want, and then I'm going to lock you up for 72 hours where you can't get out. How is that not policing? How is that not containment, control, surveillance, and punishment? And also, then you're going to street them after that, and we're in the same condition that we were in before. And there was an incident in Baltimore that you all know that was very heartbreaking of that happening, right? So we're saying care, not trauma. We also don't want to say counselors, not cops, because I saw a video of a counselor at a school sending a 6-year-old for 72-hour psych hold. So that's not the kind of 6-year-old black girl, of course, right? So that's not the kind of counseling I want for people in my schools. I want folks to actually get care, to get community, to get de-escalation training, conflict resolution training. In Baltimore, I know that y'all have a complicated relationship with this, but there was a meditation program in schools for conflict resolution, and kids would be like going home and being like, you need to take 3 breaths, Mom. That's what I want. I want communities and care, not someone who's going to, under the guise of counseling someone, also police and regulate them and separate families and perhaps lead to deportation and so on through involvement in the system. So we are calling for no policing of any kind, no soft police. What we want is people to have their needs met as needs, including mental health needs, and often mental health needs are produced by not having a place to live, not having enough food, having experienced violence, and not having access to healing. So we want to make sure people get actually what they need rather than just another form of policing. How do we get there? Is one chapter that we wrote. It's a 400-page book. I don't know. So we did our best to distill it all. But I think for me, the most mind-blowing thing about this is it's really we have to change not just our material conditions, which we do have to change, we also have to change how we think. And what police have done is they've sold us a bill of goods. And Mariam calls it a protection racket, right? They're like, we're going to rip you off your land, we're going to enclose all the resources, we're going to make you work 18 hours and pay you tiny wages and take away all your abilities to care for each other, and then we're going to be like, oh, it's really unsafe out here. But if you give us a lot of money, we'll make it safer. And then they don't make it safer, and it's still violent, and they're like, well, actually, you need to give us more money. And then they don't make it safer, and it's still violent. In fact, it's getting worse because they're sucking up all the money that could be going to housing and food and community and whatever, and they're like, well, you just have to give us more money. Right? So how we get there, in part, is about breaking the protection racket's hold on our head. It's understanding that safety is not a fixed thing that you can be sold like a bill of goods. It's not something that the cops can sell you. It's not something a corporation can sell you in your Ring camera or whatever. It's relational. It depends. Are you in relationship with people who will come when you need help? Are you in relationship with people who will make sure that you are housed, that you are fed, that your needs are met, and who will hold you accountable when you do things that are harmful, and will make sure that you step into being the person who can't make that harm or doesn't do that harm? So that is something that we have to build with each other. That's why I say wearing masks is about us keeping each other safe. That's the first step of building safety in a pandemic with each other. It's being in relationship and accountability with each other. So, but the way that they manage to sort of convince us that they are the only way to safety is actually keeping us from safety. So it's about how we get there starts in our brain and how we think about safety. So that's maybe the hardest thing about how we get there. Another hard thing about how we get there is, and I'm sure in this delightful anarchist coffee shop there might be some back and forth about this, what is the role of the state in abolitionist futures? We have some questions. Not all abolitionists agree, but in massive campaigns and movements to defund police and fund community safety, the question was like, oh, wait, what are we funding? We're funding public housing, but there's cops all through that, and it's really shitty quality, and that's kind of policing in a different form. Are we funding private-public partnerships to do something? Sounds like capitalism. Are we funding community land trusts? Is that accessible to everyone? What are we doing? Like, how are we imagining the future that we want? How are we imagining how resources will be concentrated, redistributed, and how do we imagine that happening without policing? Right? How do we imagine that happening and being like, you can get welfare, but only if you only have 2 kids and you get married. You can have housing, but you better not have any domestic violence going on there because then you're going to get kicked out. And you certainly better not have your nephew come home from prison and try and stay with you. And no one there can smoke a blunt, even if it's legal in the state, right? So is that really what we're looking for? And is there some way that we can imagine states that aren't operating as technologies of extraction and redistribution of resources in policed forms, in which they decide whose life chances will be supported and whose life chances will not, who will get an opportunity to heal from trauma, who won't, who's in, who's out at the border? Can we imagine a state that is not carceral? And if we can, what's the work we need to do to get there? And if we can't, what other forms of practices and social relations and governance do we want to be imagining and dreaming and practicing now? As I said, those are live questions in the abolitionist movement. Even the question of what a state is. It's not some fixed thing up in the sky that operates on us. It's not an alien ship in the sky. It is made up of institutions, of people who animate those institutions and who are contesting for different visions of the world. And we see right now two very different visions of the world being contested through the institutions of the state and outside them. And for some people, their vision of not a state is because we want to put in a Christian, Judeo-Christian theocratic form of governance, and so we're going to destroy state institutions from the right. And then some of us are like conflicted. Do we want to fight to save those institutions, or do we want to abandon them and build something else? So then the question is, what do we do in the meantime? And so I'm not giving you answers to these questions. If you came here tonight for those answers, I do not have them. But I have more questions for you. I help make this discussion tool to invite you into this conversation with us. And to the extent that you work through these questions with yourself in terms of diary and reflection, in terms of forming a study group, in terms of sitting down with your homies and asking yourselves these questions, and you have answers you want to share them with us at Interrupting Criminalization. We're going to be putting out a series of zines with responses, and we're going to have a virtual gathering next year to talk more about it. In the meantime, the answer I have is that, I don't know, everything, everywhere, all at once. I don't know. It was a movie I didn't totally get, but I think the idea is that, which is we need to be practicing forms of governance that do not replicate policing. And we need to be fighting to extract all the resources the state has stolen from us from it. And we need to defend the things that we're doing and creating and building and practices in our communities against whoever is coming for them. The state, the right, whoever. And so we need to decide which part of those things we're going to get into, and we have to decide how to do it in coordination. If you want to fight to elect someone who's going to help you extract resources from the state, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's a terrible idea. What I am going to tell you to do is make sure you're doing it in coordination with those of us over here who are doing something different so that you're not acting at cross purposes. And when that strategy stops working to our larger purpose, we abandon it and we go to something else. So those are the conversations. Of course, the against, beyond, and within the state framework comes from movements of the Global South. It comes from the Zapatistas. It comes from the Piqueteros in Argentina. It comes from the movement of landless workers in Brazil. It comes from movements who have, after 60 years of post-colonial struggle, 100 years of post-colonial struggle, are saying, this thing about seizing the state and transforming it into a socialist institution and having it wither away. I always never understood the withering away part. I'm like, oh, it's just going to spontaneously combust and wither away. I don't get that step. But that's not working in our experience. So we want to try something else. We want to practice new forms of governance rooted in horizontalism, not vanguardism, and we want to figure out how we stop playing what my friend Shir Hassan calls this football match, where you're just going between anarchism and communism. And actually, is there something else in this field in between that we could be exploring and trying and learning from? And that's what this discussion tool is trying to help us do. Finally, we invite people to experiment and build. So if we're doing a dual power approach, like that's just not theory, right? Zapatistas, not theory. Having really long meetings with lots of people in community to think about what safety is and what communities need and how do we build it together and how do we relate to the state of Mexico while we're doing that in the world and our compañeras and compas around the country, around the world. The piqueteros in Argentina were not just like, oh, I'm just going to sit in my little neighborhood and make sure we have things that work for us. They were in relationship with each other and with other communities and and trading from Venezuela to Argentina. And like, there's so many ways that people are thinking about how to build safer communities. And so we have to make sure that we're taking action. And we have to give up on the fear of failure. We are being failed right now. We spend over $100 billion a year on policing and growing every year, and we still experience violence at rates unprecedented anywhere else in the world. It's already a failure. Nothing we can try could fail more. So I'm not saying we do this like recklessly and without regard to harm of people when we might fail in our experiments, but we have to, and I'm saying this to myself because again, Capricorn, don't like failing. Not a fan. Don't like doing it, feel a lot of shame and frustration, and will work really hard to not be in a situation where I'm going to do that. And I have to push myself to believe that we have to all try something different, because we have to be there was a fish millennia ago who was like, oh no, I'm gonna grow some feet. I don't know what land is, I don't know what air is, I don't know what any of those things are, but I'm gonna grow some feet. And millennia later, we're sitting here in Red Emma's Cafe in Baltimore talking about that fish. So we have to learn to be that fish and try something new and different that has a better chance of achieving safety and well-being for all our communities than what we're trying now. And last thing, and it should be the first thing, and I think I referenced it at the beginning, is this book is rooted in Black feminism. We are Black feminist abolitionists. And that means that we believe not just in eliminating one system of oppression, it means that we are about eliminating all of the interlocking systems of oppression that operate in our lives, including imperialism, which means we are internationalists. It also means that our organizing is rooted in Black women's experiences. And what my research and organizing and agitating and all the things, analysis that I was doing over the last 30 years around police violence against Black women, girls, and trans people has taught me is that looking at the world through those experiences gets you to abolition much quicker. Because you see all the ways policing operates on the bodies of Black women, girls, and trans people very quickly, and then you're like, none of this. If I really am a Black feminist and I want to get rid of all interlocking systems of oppression, then I literally want to build a new world. And I can't just do a new world in the global north and have that be at the expense and extraction from the global south. I care about Black women everywhere, not just here, which means that we have to pay attention to what's going on globally. And that we have to do that through a deep culture of care. So that's where we get to the end of the book, which is we want a revolution. Nothing, just a little something. And we end by asking folks, how will you practice Black feminist abolition dreams today? Because it really is an everyday act. It's every interaction, it's every project, it's every dream, it's every possibility you create. And we give so many tools for folks to do that, whether you're thinking about how to deal with courts and court reform, whether you want to defund the police, as folks have been trying to do in Baltimore, whether you want to build your experiment in community-based safety strategies. If you're doing it, we have a tool for that. So go check out Interrupting Criminalization's website and see both how your work is reflected in it and also some ideas for things that you might want to do instead. If you want to be in conversation about No More Police, we have a discussion guide that's available on the No More Police website. Again, questions it doesn't have to be formal. Just sit down with your homies or sit down with yourself and ask yourself the questions. Some of them are things you can research. Some of them are things you can imagine and dream. Some of them are things that you can learn to better argue around. You could sharpen how you make the case. Some things are about sharpening your own understanding of the case. So it's a really great discussion guide made by Rachel Zafer. We fought really hard for this cover. I don't know if you all know, but there's something that happens with publishers where they give you covers for your book that are just kind of, Erica's nodding. They just make you think like, do these people, anyway, so, do they want the book to sell? Anyway, so we reached out to an artist who we know and love, Naima Thomas, and she's on Instagram at Naima Thomas Art, I think. And she made this gorgeous cover for us, and we think it's great that it has like our names on it and stuff and words on the back, but we really wanted people to have the whole thing. So you can get that at our merch store, and I think it's only open till the end of the year, so collector's item, get it. And then, you're looking for that holiday gift for your loved ones, right? Because again, or your boss, you want to be starting conversations. You want to put down that no more police mug in the canteen and be like, I'm just saying. So, or there's some stickers that say no more police. Y'all know what to do with that? Don't attribute it to me. Okay, so these are available, and they're all benefits for the Justice Committee, which has been standing with families of people killed by police in New York City for over 30 years, and the Chicago Police Torture Center, or the Chicago Torture Justice Center, actually is what it's called. The Chicago Torture Justice Center, which is the product of a historic campaign for reparations for survivors of police violence that won many things, including a center for people who have experienced police violence to access healing and what they call politicized healing, which means we're healing in a way that is about changing the conditions that cause the harm. So all these things will not only make your family and the abolitionists in your life happy, they will benefit these organizations. So you should go shopping. I guess, what is this? Yesterday was shopping day, but it's all weekend. And that's only till the end of the year as well. If you have friends in Montreal, wow, that's where I was born, but I don't know why I said that. If you have friends in DC, I'll be there on Monday talking with Makia Green from Harriet's Wildest Dreams. So send folks there if you have DC friends or if you want to come and continue the conversation there. Come online on Wednesday and hear about We Are Survivors, where we're going to be talking with editors and writers from a book called Abolition Feminisms. You can find out more by following us at Interrupt Crim, and probably you should just follow us there anyway, because that's where you find all this juicy stuff. I'm going to be speaking with some folks, including Rashida Tlaib and Stephanie Chang, on December 6th in Detroit, where I live, at the Detroit Justice Center. So follow Just City Detroit for information about that. Those are the events. And there's some other books we think you should buy. So Shir Hassan's is a TJ fellow at Interrupting Criminalization, just wrote an amazing book about liberatory harm reduction, saving our own lives, that you can probably get here. You can pre-order Mariam Kaba's next book because she's having book Irish twins, I guess, with two different book daddies. So she's co-writing a brilliant book with Kelly Hayes that's going to be available soon, so you should get Let This Radicalize You. You should also get Erica's new book called Healing Justice Lineages. Yes. Living at the Crossroads of Liberation, Collective Care, and Safety. Healing Justice Lineages, Kara Page, Erica Woodland, get it. It's so good, I want it right now. And then, I don't know, I'm working on a thing. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to have Irish twins with not as a single parent. So I'm just trying to look at how emergent strategies help get us closer to abolition. Because again, Capricorn, I think we get a policy agenda and then we do this and we follow a line, and it turns out that's not how you get to abolition. So I'm really trying very hard to learn differently. So hopefully that comes in 2023. The end. Questions?
Before the important things, like the questions and the subject matter, can I say that I'm over here taking mental notes from you in terms of how to do a presentation? Like with the subject matter and then the events coming up and the product and the organizing, and it's all right there. I mean, I'm like, oh, I'm learning over here. I'm learning over here, I'm taking notes. And let me also say, you trying to start shit. No, really you are, because I'm really tempted.
Always.
I'm tempted to get one of those posters, as you say, and send it to my cousins, my little. Well, if I could just get a hold of my nieces and nephews and sit down with them and have these discussions, I'd be all right. You know what the problem with that is? I got to get through the cousins, their parents. That's where the arguments are going to come in, and then before we even get to like my mother would wrestle with all that. So you're trying to start shit, because when I send that poster, I'm gonna let you know all the hell that breaks out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But also there's, you can send your cousins, the little cousins, to Queenie's Crew. Project Nia runs Queenie's Crew, which is like an abolitionist crew for kids. And you don't have to tell them. You just be like, oh, I'm just signing them up for Queenie's Crew. And then you just organize them by themselves.
I like that. I like that. I like that. We no doubt have many thoughts and comments and questions. We want to keep those truncated, I like to use that word, like kind of direct and straightforward, because we surely could be here for 3 more hours discussing these important matters. We don't have that type of time. So in order to allow a few folk to get a question or a comment in, we want you to keep yours rather direct and truncated. We certainly invite diversity of questioners or commenters. And as you raise your hand, I will make my way to you with the mic. So if you have a thought or a comment or a question, we definitely want you to raise your hand. Folk are formulating their things. You've helped me in a number of ways, and I need to sit down and kind of wrestle with it some more and push myself some more, because much of my movement toward the abolitionist thought, kind of away from reform and more towards abolition, still has fallen somewhere in the range of, okay, we need to abolish and deconstruct the entire thing and rebuild a whole new public safety system with more trained social workers and more outreach folk and change the economy and so forth and so on. And then I usually end that by saying, and keep a minimal, just a minimal amount of martial personnel for the occasional wildness, the sniper on the top of the Vegas building, or Pulse or Q or what have you. And then I think about it, and you've got me thinking about it even more with the nice discussion. Well, first of all, they weren't worth shit in Uvalde. Obviously, we see that didn't work when they were there. It really didn't work with Q the other week. That's not how the person was stopped, so forth and so on. So I'm being pushed kind of even in terms of rethinking what it means or doesn't mean to rebuild a system and have a minimal amount of martially trained personnel. I don't know if you want to kind of deconstruct some of that or touch on that in terms of what that new vision, as you say, the new dream of public safety system would look like.
I think that you hit it on the head in terms of, in Uvalde, they did nothing. Children died. As parents desperately tried to get to their children to stop it. And then there was even, once the cops got in there, a cop said something to a little girl that made her think it was safe to come forward, and that got her killed. So really, not doing a thing. And then in Pulse, they waited outside for an hour while people bled out. Not doing a thing. And then at Club Q, yes, a trans woman and a guy took the person down, disarmed him, and then what the cops did was beat the guy, lock him in a car for an hour while he pled to know what was happening to his family if they were still alive. So I feel like those are just 3 incidents I can name. There's more and more like those every day. And I really believe in the we keep us safe. It's not like I don't have fears. In New York City, I lived on the first floor of a building on a busy street. There were nights when I was like, oh God, someone's coming in the window. And then I'm like, and if that happens, I know Bruce next door. I have my little baseball bat here. I'm gonna bang on the wall, and Bruce is gonna come, and then the whole neighborhood's gonna come, and we don't need anybody, right? We're gonna figure it out. People got shot outside my window. People got stabbed outside my window. That was right before I moved from Brooklyn. There was a moment where there was a fight, everyone was drunk, whatever, and then all of a sudden there was whoa, there was blood. People quickly handled that. Someone went out who was a nurse, handled the blood, de-escalated, separated people, figured out how to calm him down, calm her down, and then she was like, no, I don't want the cops, I just want him to stop. Done. Another time there was a guy outside my building, he was really hot at the beginning of the pandemic. Someone had taken his phone. And he was mad. He really needed his phone for his business, and he couldn't call the cops because his business is criminalized. But he really needed his phone, and he was hot, and he was out for blood. We de-escalated that as a community. I kept an eye out for the cops. Other people told him to, and we all were like, you have 1,000% right to be mad. I have been as mad at you screaming on the street, but because I look like I do, I didn't have heat come. I know you don't get to be mad like I do, and I want to protect that right for you. So we're all going to do that. People talked to him. People validated his concerns. Someone went and negotiated for the phone. Everybody went home safe. If the cops had shown up, or if the community hadn't stepped in, then someone might not have made it home that night. Maybe more than one person. I know we can do it, but we all have to be into doing it, and it can't be that we designate some people to have more power over other humans. We all have to develop the skills to de-escalate, to engage in conflict resolution, to do basic, first aid, and we also have to develop the skills to do emotional, mental health trauma first aid. And then, the sniper on the roof is often a cop. So I feel like we have to figure out also what are the things that they put in our imagination that tell us that we always need cops, right? What are the things that the boogeymen that they implant in our brains that then we organize our lives around those situations instead of organizing our lives around the vast majority of situations that we can resolve better with more dignity, with more care, or also that they tell us to organize our lives around the crisis. What are we going to do in that moment of crisis? Abolition means we get 1,000 miles ahead of the crisis. So we're not organizing our lives around the crisis. We're organizing our lives around preventing the crisis. And I just want to say one more thing because it really gets it for me is my friend Erin Miles Cloud, who actually is often in Baltimore, I think her family's here, and who co-runs Movement for Family Power, says, everybody cares about someone's safety somewhere some of the time. Abolitionists care about everybody's safety everywhere all of the time. So in all the scenarios you describe, I care about everyone's safety and I want to get as far ahead of the issue as we can so that we can prevent that moment of crisis and also be equipped to meet it right at the beginning when it first starts before it escalates into something that becomes more unmanageable.
Awesome. Questions, comments?
Howdy.
Hi.
First, I want to thank you for your work. It's very important.
Thank you.
And then I know that conversations within your own community are very important. I feel like members of my community in particular have been the victims of such systemic violence for so long that they're too afraid to even open their minds for a discussion. It gets to the point where it's like, is it even worth trying anymore? Because, I'm Black, I'm queer. It's like my safety's in line, So is there a good way to facilitate those conversations or to decide when to have those conversations?
I mean, you know your community and your people better than I do, right? So I'm never going to be able to give you an answer. What I can say that has been helpful for the workshops Mariam and I and many other people facilitate is to start off by asking people to remember a time when they felt safe, or to draw a world that is the future they want to see, that is safe, that invites people to think about it. And rarely when you ask someone to draw a world where, the future you want, rarely are there cops in that picture. When you ask people what last time they felt safe and what made them feel safe, relationships, family, food, care, compassion, someone who was there when they needed them, someone who cared for them when they were grieving. And that's, to be honest, what the right organizes around, by the way. The way they have gotten us to this moment is by sitting with everyone who was grieving and having coffee with them, praying with them when they lost their job, being there for them when their marriage fell apart. That's how they have organized to the point where they are now. And I think that that's how we start. And that's what we try. And also, we talk in the book about, I can give you facts and figures, from my head all day. And sure, that might convince some Capricorns. But we actually have to speak to people's hearts and people's fears. Safety is the most fundamental human need, more than anything else. So we have to speak to that fear. And then also we have to give people an embodied sense of another possibility. So I think it's reminding people when they had that embodied sense of that possibility and showing up. Ruth Wilson Gilmore says that being an abolitionist organizer means knocking on people's doors and being like, hi, I'm Andrea, I'm an abolitionist, I'm here to solve your problems. Because whatever problems you got, the cops are getting in the way of it. You need housing? Well, they just sucked up 40% of your budget, so you don't have housing. You need health care? They also suck that money up, and then if you might go to the hospital, there's probably cops there. So, and then we're gonna go from there. Environmental, so I think there's ways of starting conversations that start with what people care about and inviting them to imagine and remember when they felt safe or safer, and how do we build towards more of that and less of this.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you. I mean, often people say oh, our communities want more cops, because they're being posed that false dichotomy, cops or nothing. And then we're going to show you some films called The Purge, and we're going to make you read Lord of the Flies. We talk in the book about how how many of you had to read Lord of the Flies? Everybody in the English-speaking world had to read Lord of the Flies. You know what Lord of the Flies is? Propaganda. What does it tell you about a world without, civilization in the form of cops? Right, yes. The white boys will go crazy. But that's the reason some people want cops, right? They're gonna be like, white supremacist violence is on the rise. We need cops. Except that the cops in the hoods and the okay. But I think that what we don't tell are stories about safety. You know what the real story was? That was a fictional story. It was written by a guy named William Golding, who was mad because he read The Swiss Family Robinson, which was like a kind of idyllic thing, and he was like, that's not how it would go down. So he wrote Lord of the Flies to say how he thought it would go down. Actual story, 18 Tongan teens got lost at sea. They took a boat on a joyride, storm. It's a little Gilligan's Island, but different. And then they wound up on this island. They were on there for 18 months. It was not Lord of the Flies. They lived cooperatively. They built a school. They had music. They had culture. They shared work cooperatively. And they had a conflict resolution system, which is you go walk to that side of the island, you go walk to that side of the island, and then come back and we'll talk about it. They survived 18 months because they knew that they needed each other to survive, that they would not survive if they didn't have each other and they weren't in relationship. Is that story something everyone in the English-speaking world has to read? Nope.
Fascinating. I got to follow up on that story because we don't know about that. Untold history, that's why we exist here at Red Emma's. Another comment, question, or anything like that. I'm looking at the title of this. I just finished reading the 20th anniversary re-release of Robin D.G. Kelly's Freedom Dreams. And so you're making me think of that in terms of, it's not only a matter of deconstructing the foolishness extant, but what is it that we as in Robin's focus, specifically black revolutionaries, black radicals, but what is it as we as radicals generally are trying to build, and how is it that we're putting together? And obviously a large part of this conversation is that. So I'm very much looking forward to how you kind of further that in that particular book. Questions or comments?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jack. Pronouns
Jack.
are they, them. Thank you so much for being here, for your talk, and for your labor in this work. I have a question. You did talk about this a little bit, but I would love to hear you sort of expand on, safety for everyone all the time and the inclusion of trans folks in your work. And I'm curious, because there are a lot of folks who call themselves feminists, a lot of folks who call themselves abolitionists who do not do that. And I'm curious if you had a process or a breaking through experience where you sort of came to terms with inclusion of trans folks, and if not, if that's always sort of been your journey, I would just love to hear a little bit how you got there, because I think it would really benefit myself and other folks in the room who maybe aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I wasn't born this way. In some respects. I grew up in the 80s, so, insert transphobic feminism there. But what helped me, very quickly understand that whatever white feminists were talking about in that respect was wrong, was looking at policing. And looking at how policing operates not just on the axes of race and class and nation, but policing literally polices the borders of the gender binary. And was reading Kathy Cohen's article being like, all black femmes are gendered agender, right? Are gendered out of white femininity and are policed accordingly. And the same is true around ableism and disability, right? That black folks are disabled out of categories of able-bodied people by virtue of anti-blackness. And so there's no reason that we would not understand policing across the gender spectrum, particularly as black people, as something that is in all of our interest to fight. And the In Our Names network literally was formed as a space in which to make possibility for that kind of alliance between folks who were fighting under the banner Black Trans Lives Matter and folks who were fighting under the banner Say Her Name, and to understand how we could be fighting with and in solidarity with each other, recognizing that we were on different parts of the gender spectrum perhaps, but also being gendered in a particular way based on anti-blackness. And so, yeah, I think it was, I also, benefited from challenges and instruction very early on. So I think people should get out and read. People should get out and understand. And I think now, I'm flabbergasted when people are like, I'm going to fight for my right to abortion, but those people over there should, I'm just like, it's the same fight, literally. Like, could you go study patriarchy, please? Because if you did, then you wouldn't be talking foolishness right now. So I think also it's like literally having a materialist analysis of your conditions and what's driving them, and then understanding where your shared fight is, which is any kind of leftist trajectory if people are willing to commit to study and struggle. So I invite everyone into that.
Being here, I really appreciate it. I am a student at Johns Hopkins, and I have been there just for a few months. And before I got here, I thought that the question of a private police force starting there was still a question. Mm-hmm. And then after I got here, I understood, no, that's already happening. All these town halls and whatever, that's just a show. It's already happening. And so since it really does seem that's already happening, I'm curious in your experience about ways to undermine processes of incipient policing. Because for however many years that has been planned, it is still, of course, in a certain sense, incipient. And it's very intimidating to think about it like that. So I'm trying to recast it as like, no, this is a little baby police force. And
no, absolutely.
How can we mess with it to the best of our ability?
So I'm going to invite you to join the Beyond Do No Harm Network. Just go to the Interrupting Criminalization website. Because the other thing that I learned from studying police violence against Black women, queer, and trans people for so long is that criminalization often happens at the point of seeking care, including health care. So when Trump got into power and we were seeing like, oh, he's using criminalization to advance all of his agendas, oh, no surprise, see fascism. But then seeing particularly how it was happening around criminalization of sexual, gender, and reproductive autonomy, and then seeing how it was happening through criminalization of access to care generally, right? You show up for care, you're undocumented, you're going to ICE. You show up for care, you're trans, you're getting criminalized. You show up for care, you're pregnant, and someone thinks that your pregnancy ended in a way that they don't approve of, you're going to jail, right? Somebody thinks that you're using drugs while you're pregnant, while she's drinking over there, but like then different, right? So we're looking at all the ways that criminalization happened through access to medical care, and then we launched this campaign at Sister Song. Was Sister Song 2019 here also in Baltimore? No, it was Atlanta. Anyway, so we launched this campaign there to bring medical providers, students, and nurses and healthcare providers together to fight criminalization in all its forms. So there's 13 principles, and the first one is get cops out of healthcare facilities, including private cops. And so there's a whole Cops Out of Care network of people who are organizing in hospitals in LA, San Francisco, everywhere across the country, to Boston, to get cops out of hospitals because they kill people in hospitals. And also because they keep people who need care from coming into hospitals. And also they're participating in criminalization as people are seeking care. So I really invite you to join that network because you'll find a lot of folks strategizing around it. We're about to put out more resources and tools for that. And then you won't feel alone because there's literally thousands of healthcare providers in this network across the country and medical students. So thank you for wanting to be part of that work. Rob has a question.
Good evening, and thank you for coming to Baltimore. I have one thought that's just like spinning around in my head. I think there's been a lot of conversation, study, and reading, especially by folks I would assume that are in this space, around abolition, at least since 2020. How do we move generally from a space of learning and a space of unlearning to a space of doing and aligning our actions with what we say that we care about? Because in a world where capitalism won't be abolished tomorrow, how can care really be possible? And like, what happens in that middle space?
I think that is literally the question that we are asking in this, in the discussion tool about abolition in the state. Like, what kinds of work needs to happen now to generate new possibilities? What kind of people do we need to become in order to bring into being the world we long for? What kind of practices of governance do we need to practice? So Black Nashville Assembly is one group of folks in Nashville who are trying to figure out how to practice social governance and mutual aid as Black people in Nashville. How do we do that through defund fights, right? Defund fights are about having conversations with your neighbors, friends, and family about how you think you should spend collective resources. People are practicing collective care, right? They're saying, in my building, we have a text thread, and when someone needs something, I don't worry anymore that I'm gonna die alone and no one will find me for 3 weeks, which I did the whole pandemic when I was alone in New York, right? And so I think there's ways that people are practicing collective care, and I think the thing about practicing new worlds that I talk about is like, just anything, just do anything, but do something. So I think the one thing, I was reading this in Leanne Bitamasake Simpson's book, As We've Always Done, but I'm sure there's many other places you can read it, is like the only thing in Anishinaabe tradition that she was talking about that is not productive is thought without action. She's like, action generates theory, theory generates action. Theory on its own is a waste of time and breath. And so just do something. I mean, do something, make sure it's aligned with your values, with the politic, with the world that you want to build, but don't wait for it to show up tomorrow. It's not coming tomorrow. We're it. No one's coming to save us. It's just us. So we got to do something and let go of perfection, which, as you and I both learned in Bold, is a deep commitment to being dissatisfied, and to white supremacy. So let's just do something and practice. But I do think people are stuck in analysis paralysis and impurity politics. And I want people to be like, it's not going to be perfect, and someone's going to tell me that, maybe not so kindly, and I'm just going to keep moving towards my vision because there's nothing else I can do. So I want to invite everyone to doing that. There's one more question.
I think we'll make this the last question so that we have plenty of time for everyone to come up and meet and get books signed by Andrea.
Hi, my name is Jabari, he, him
Hi,
pronouns. Thank you so much, first of all. You did an amazing presentation. I wanted to ask you about how you might connect what you do in the book, but police abolition to many other systems and institutions that also need to be abolished. Because I often find myself thinking police should be abolished, and I see policing as a manifestation of much deeper systemic violences, like how did we get here? Our cultures around like property and ownership, around race and gender, around like even the existence of nation states. And then I get to this point where I'm like, the world as we know it kind of needs to be abolished. And then that gets very overwhelming. So I'm wondering if you can speak to, I guess, having that type of analysis and doing the work with that framework, and it kind of going off of your question, like how do we start doing that when you see it as like the life that I live is just bound up in all of this like pain and trauma and stuff like that.
Thank you for asking that question. I'm like, every day I'm like, I'm quitting writing this book. This is a really nice cover, but I'm not writing it. And then you just made me do it again. So the first thing I'm going to say is that we don't know the role of the state in abolitionist futures in some ways. Like, is it an abolition democracy that W.B. Du Bois talked about? Is that possible? We don't know. What we do know is that abolition is not going to happen unless we abolish racial capitalism. Racial capitalism and police abolition hand in hand. One requires the other. We need to get rid of both. So we're clear that we're trying to get rid of capitalist carceral states. Then, wow, that's a lot. And also the climate is collapsing and the world is falling apart and people are getting shot up every day. So emergent strategies, it looks at complexity science and looks at how you shape and shift complex systems through relatively simple interactions. And that's why I'm writing this book, because I, like you, I'm like, ooh, that's a lot. And I'm looking for like, and then my response for a lot of my time was like, okay, I have this law degree. I'm gonna go figure out how to like do harm reduction over here and pull people out of the system as much as I can and take as many tools away from them as I can. But I'm like holding back this thing, and someone over here better be building this new world and really fast because it's really hard and it's awful, right? turns out we all have to be part of building the new world, and that it's not going to happen through a policy agenda. We're not going to create a big department of anti-carcerality inside a carceral state. And so we have to figure out how to practice relatively small interactions to shift larger systems. And that means focusing at the point of critical connections, which is like your synapses firing, two ants meeting and somehow communicating there's food over there that shifts like a whole anthill in a particular way. Starlings, move in the sky. I don't know how they don't have giant traffic jams and car crashes, but there's apparently simple rules about how far you stay from the bird next to you, that you can do that. I'm not saying people are shooting people up in queer clubs, be like starlings. I'm not saying that. And sometimes that's why I want to quit writing the book, because it feels like sounds like I'm saying that, which is ridiculous and ungrounded, and as a dialectical materialist feels just weird. But it is about focusing on the relationships and focusing on creating networks and focusing on creating communities of practice in such a way that if we are doing these things in ways that are connected with a shared set of values and intention, we actually can shift whole systems. And we've seen that, right? Like, what happened in the summer of 2020? Literally, were you at this meeting? There was a meeting in January 2020 in Miami where a bunch of us got together to assess the state of the police abolition movement. And we were like, ooh, Lord, we have a long way to go. We have to solidify our message. Like, we have to understand, this is gonna take a long time. And then in June 2020, we were like, okay, here we are, right? So there's something about how complex systems work, which includes society and anthills and other things, that if you focus on these critical connections and you do the groundwork and you till the soil and you build it and you practice and you practice and you network these conversations, there are moments of shift, portals that conditions produce. And so what I'm thinking about I'm doing every day is I'm looking around me, I'm seeing what I can do in terms of the relationships I'm building, the networks I'm creating, the communities of practice I'm building. How am I practicing with one person, one friend? The part where we talk about relationship dynamics. Be like, this feels a little red flaggy. Maybe this little abuse, I don't know what's going on. And then we have those conversations, and then we practice them with someone else. We do someone else, we do someone else. It literally, it's hard to believe, and it's so hard for me to articulate, but that is what produces shifts. 30 years ago, I never thought I'd be having this conversation right now. There's an article about No More Police, an interview with Mariam and I in Harper's Bazaar. When I was a little girl, I would steal my mom's Harper's Bazaar that she got from the hair salon and read it, and I really never thought there was gonna be a front page article about abolition in it that I was in, right? When I was being an anti-apartheid organizer, I was practicing the person who could be the person who wrote this book or was part of this movement, right? I think what emergent strategy does is it takes what feels massive into the realm of the actionable, and understanding that each interaction, each network we build, each community of practice we're in, we can't see where it's going, but it will generate new conditions, and that there's science behind that. And I'll try and write it better for you. But it really is just looking at what's in front of us every day. Whose lives can you impact? What is the work that you're doing? How can you practice new ways of being? And then share that out with other people every day. I know it's not a satisfactory answer. It's the best one I have.
And that's it, isn't it? We keep on building the answers. We don't have the total satisfactory answer right now. But this conversation this evening helps us a long way in terms of what it means to build these types of answers, to deconstruct what's going on, and to build a new situation and new practices, as you say. A couple things before we give up a final round of applause for our speaker this evening. Just want to remind you that the cafe is still open, so if you want to go ahead and put it in order to get something to eat, you are quite welcome to do so. This whole important volume adds to a variety of dynamic books that are helping us deconstruct current systems. So I mean, I add this to Gio Mayer and Alex Vitale and Derica Purnell, who spoke for us, Dorothy Roberts, who told us about what she calls the family policing system, i.e. the child welfare system. And so we're so glad to have this as a part of that volume. So any of the books that you see on the shelves up here are purchasable so that you can add that to No More Police. Now, I told you earlier that if you say the magic words, then we might open up the bookstore with all the other 8,000 books so you can get some more things to take along with No More Police. That's only if there's enough people who are really serious about reading and serious about books. So, can anybody guess what the magic words are for the evening? It ought to be real obvious. 1, 2, 3. They don't want any books, John. That was weak. They don't want no reading. I'm gonna try that one more time, and if it doesn't work this time, the doors stay locked. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, the bookstore might magically open in about 5 minutes or so. Make sure you tell somebody what they missed at Red Emma's, hashtag Red Emma's, meet somebody, network with somebody, come meet our speaker for the evening. The book is available. We have more copies right there. We have a couple of Merriam's things also, so you want to get that as well. Please go get your copy of No More Police. Bring it back. My sister, thank you so much for coming back to us.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Andrea J. Ritchie.